Sokoto is a long way from the heart of the southeast, and keeping Kanu there is seen by many as a way to isolate him from his base and his family. But Adeyanju made the trip and spent over 2 hours in a private meeting with him. This is a man who describes himself as being pro-One Nigeria. He isn't an IPOB member or a separatist. Yet, after sitting face to face with Kanu, his message changed the temperature of the conversation.
My wonderful people, please, let me tell you the headline of this message, or rather, the take back home. African Union, in their own magnanimity, don't come out to decide, say, if Nigerian government no release Kanu, before the ending of this month, will be month of May, say they go sanction them, and maybe they don't sack all the whole Fulanis from Nigeria, where they work on that African Union. This one where they don't where they don't have the balls to talk about this issue, because the Nigerian government, they sponsor ECOWAS, Nigerian government, with the money they are borrowing, they're the one sponsoring African Union. But let's not dwell on that. Let us focus on the main, subject matter. African Union orders immediate release of Kanu as Deji Adeyanju visits Kanu in Sokoto prison. It is a 2 message combined together, but you are going to listen to it one after the other. And as you are doing so, please kindly share, like, comment, and subscribe. Not by force, if it touch your heart. We are not begging. We are not forcing you. Sorry, we are not forcing you to subscribe. So do it from the magnanimity of your heart. Hey, me and this English this morning, magnanimity. I beg, let us listen to this message. Yeah, we'll come back here to discuss more from the comment section. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Please follow us on our social media handles. And as you do so, may my God continue to bless you and see you through. Oh yeah, let's go there. Don't forget, today is Sunday, and today happened to be the 3rd day in the month of May and in the year of 2026. You get the point now, eh? Let's go there.
Adeyanju came out and said clearly that he does not believe Nnamdi Kanu deserves to be behind bars. He looked at the evidence and the person and concluded that Kanu did not personally commit the violent crimes the state is trying to pin on him. He even went as far as to clear the air on the End SARS protests. There has been a lot of talk trying to link Kanu to the chaos that happened during those protests, but Adeyanju pointed the finger where he believes it belongs, at the thugs who hijacked the movement, not at the man in the cell. This is a powerful testimony because it comes from a critic, someone who doesn't necessarily agree with Kanu's vision for a separate state, but agrees with his right to be free and his right to speak.
Okay.
The most striking part of Adeyanju's commentary was his analogy of Nigeria as a forced marriage. It is a sentiment that resonates deeply with the Biafran audience and many Nigerians who feel marginalized. He argued that if people are unhappy, you don't keep them in the house by locking the doors and windows. You listen, you talk. He advocated for the right to a referendum, saying that a call for a people to decide their own future should never be suppressed with iron bars. By engaging Kanu and showing this empathy, Adeyanju is showing the government a path they seem afraid to take, the path of listening. If a pro-unity activist can sit with a separatist leader and find common ground on human rights and justice, why can't the federal government do the same? The urgency of this moment cannot be overstated. We're looking at a situation where the international community is slowly losing patience. When the African Union talks about an emergency summit, they are signaling that Nigeria's internal legal battles are becoming a continental problem. For the audience in the southeast and the diaspora, this feels like a long-awaited validation. They see a man who has been labeled a terrorist by his own government being called a prisoner of conscience by international observers. They see a legal process that looks less like justice and more like a political vendetta. So where do we go from here? The ball is squarely in the court of the presidency. You can ignore a protest on the street, and you might even be able to ignore a letter from a foreign congressman, but ignoring a direct order from the African Union is a different kind of gamble. It risks isolating Nigeria on its own continent. It fuels the fire of those who say that the current structure of the country is designed to suppress certain voices rather than integrate them. As we analyze this, we have to realize that Nnamdi Kanu has become more than just a person. He is a symbol of the deep-seated grievances that have been ignored for decades. If a whole continent speaks and one man refuses to listen, is it a display of sovereign strength or the beginning of a very dangerous end for the rule of law in Africa? That is the question we are all asking today as the news hits the airwaves that the African Union has finally stepped into the ring and ordered the immediate and unconditional release of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. This is not just another headline on your social media feed. This is a seismic shift in the political landscape of Nigeria and a direct challenge to the authority of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. For years, the cry for Kanu's freedom has echoed from the streets of Umuahia to the halls of the United Nations and even into the chambers of the United States Congress. Yet, the gates of the prison have remained shut. But now, with the African Union throwing its weight behind this cause, the pressure has moved from moral appeals to a formal international demand. We have to look at what this landmark decision really represents. According to the latest reports, the African Union didn't just wake up and make this call. This comes after deep investigations into the way Nnamdi Kanu was brought back to Nigeria Nigeria. We all remember the drama of 2021 when he was essentially snatched from Kenya in what many legal experts call an extraordinary rendition. The AU is now being very clear that that move was illegal. It violated every regional and international human rights protocol that Nigeria itself signed up for. You cannot claim to be a leader in Africa while ignoring the very rules the continent established to protect its citizens. The report suggests that the AU is even planning an emergency summit specifically to address this because they see that ignoring prior court rulings from both Nigeria and Kenya is setting a precedent that could tear the legal fabric of the continent apart. This brings us to the elephant in the room. Why is the Nigerian presidency so hesitant? Why does President Tinubu seem so stubborn on this specific issue when the world is watching? There is a growing school of thought among political analysts that this isn't just about one man or one movement. Some suggest that the backing of Great Britain plays a silent but massive role here. Kanu is a British citizen, yet the diplomatic dance between London and Abuja has been strangely quiet for a long time. It makes you wonder if there are interests at play that go beyond the surface of what we see in the news. The UN has spoken, the US has spoken, and now the AU has spoken. When you have this much global pressure mounting, falling on deaf ears becomes a very loud statement of defiance. It tells the world that Nigeria might be prioritizing its internal politics or external alliances over the very international laws that give it a seat at the global table. While all this high-level diplomacy is happening, something very significant took place on the ground. The popular human rights activist Deji Adeyanju traveled all the way to the far north to visit Nnamdi Kanu in Sokoto prison. Now, think about that for a second. Whether you agree with his methods or his goals, the fact remains that the way he is being treated is becoming the yardstick by which the world measures Nigeria's commitment to democracy. If the government continues to play deaf, they might find that the silence they are trying to enforce only makes the calls for justice louder. The AU has given a clear direction. Deji Adeyanju has shown the human side of the struggle. Now, we wait to see if Abuja will choose the path of peace and international cooperation, or if it will continue to hold on to a strategy that is clearly failing to bring stability to the nation. This isn't just about Biafra or Nigeria anymore. It is about whether Africa can hold its own leaders accountable to the laws they helped write. The world is watching, the continent has spoken, and the clock is ticking for President Tinubu to make a move that could either heal a nation or deepen the divide forever. This landmark decision by the African Union is not just a piece of paper or a standard diplomatic suggestion. It is a direct confrontation with the current legal trajectory of the Nigerian state. To understand why this matters so much to every Biafran and every Nigerian today, we have to look at the sheer weight of the institution making the demand. The African Union represents the collective voice of 55 member states, and when they label an arrest as an illegal rendition, they are effectively telling the Nigerian government that they have stepped outside the bounds of civilized international behavior. This isn't just about Mazi Nnamdi Kanu anymore. It is about the integrity of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. For the AU to step in now, following the life sentence handed down just months ago in late 2025, suggests that the continental body sees a systemic failure in the Nigerian judiciary that they can no longer ignore. The move to keep Kanu in Sokoto prison is a strategic play that backfired. By taking him so far from the heart of the southeast, the government thought they could silence the movement and disconnect the leader from his people. But what happened instead was that they created a pilgrimage. When someone like Deji Adeyanju, a man who has consistently stood for a united Nigeria, decides to travel across the country to sit in a cell for 2 hours with the leader of the IPOB, it signals a shift in the national consciousness. Adeyanju's visit is significant because he doesn't come with the bias of a loyalist. He went there as a skeptic and a human rights defender, and he came out with a message that challenges the very foundation of the state's case. He saw a man who, despite the weight of a life sentence and the isolation of a northern prison, remains a symbol of an unresolved national question. We have to talk about the silence of President Tinubu in the face of this mounting global pressure. It is easy to say he is just being stubborn, but we have to look deeper. There's a strong feeling among many observers that the relationship between Abuja and London is the silent engine behind this continued detention. Kanu is a British citizen, yet the British government has been criticized for what looks like a very soft approach to his predicament. If the AU is now calling for his release, and the UN and US congressmen have already done the same, the question becomes, what is the Nigerian government waiting for? Are they waiting for a complete breakdown of diplomatic relations? Or is there a fear that releasing him would admit a level of state failure that the current administration isn't ready to face? The analysis of the NSAS connection is particularly vital here. For years, there has been an attempt to paint every form of dissent with the same brush of violence. By linking Kanu to the chaos of past protests, the state tried to justify his treatment as a matter of national security. But Adeyanju's point is the one we should all be listening to. You cannot blame the leader of a movement for the actions of state-sponsored thugs or opportunistic criminals who hijack a moment of grievance. When you suppress a people's right to even talk about their future, you don't create peace, you create a pressure cooker. This is the forced marriage analogy that is hitting home for so many of us. You cannot keep people in a union by force and then wonder why there is constant friction and resentment. The AU's plan for an emergency summit is perhaps the most aggressive diplomatic move we have seen in years regarding a single individual's human rights. It suggests that the continent is worried about the precedent being set. If Nigeria can snatch a citizen from a foreign country like Kenya without following extradition laws and then keep them imprisoned despite regional court rulings, then no African citizen is safe anywhere on the continent. This is why the Kenyan court's ruling last year, which awarded damages to Kanu, was such a turning point. It proved that the operation was a violation of international law from the very start. The AU is now picking up that baton and running with it, demanding that the Nigerian government respects the legal protocols it helped create. As the editor and creative director of this analysis, my angle is clear. We are witnessing the collision of old school state power and the modern era of international accountability. The Nigerian government is operating on a 1960s playbook of suppression in a 2026 world where every cell phone is a news station and every international body is a potential judge. The people of the Southeast and the wider Biafran audience are not just watching a legal case, they are watching a test of their own humanity. If a man can be rendered, tortured, and imprisoned against the orders of the highest continental bodies, it sends a message that the law is only for those who are willing to be silent. We also have to consider the role of empathy in politics. Deji Adeyanju's empathy is what the government lacks. He doesn't have to agree with the idea of a separate Biafra to agree that Nnamdi Kanu is a human being with fundamental rights. By acknowledging the need to listen to differing views, Adeyanju is proposing a middle ground that could actually save Nigeria from itself. The government's current path is one of total dominance, but dominance is not the same as leadership. True leadership would look at the AU order not as a threat to sovereignty, but as an opportunity for national reconciliation. Releasing Nnamdi Kanu wouldn't be a sign of weakness. It would be a sign that Nigeria is finally confident enough to handle a peaceful dialogue about its own structure. The international community, led by the African Union, is now forcing a choice. Does Nigeria want to be a leader in Africa or an outlier? You cannot lead a continent while ignoring its collective legal voice. The pressure from the US and the UN was significant, but the AU pressure is personal. It is coming from the family. If the African Union decides to move forward with sanctions or a formal diplomatic snub at their upcoming summit, the economic and political fallout for the Tinubu administration could be devastating. This is the moment where the rhetoric of one Nigeria meets the reality of international justice. In the end, what we are seeing is the evolution of a struggle that has defined West Africa for decades. The story of Nnamdi Kanu in Sokoto is the story of every person who feels their voice has been stifled by the machinery of the state. It is a story of legal battles that have moved from local courtrooms to the highest halls of power in Addis Ababa. As we wait for the presidency's response, the air is thick with the realization that the old ways of doing things are no longer working. The continent has spoken, the activists have spoken, and the world is waiting for a leader who is brave enough to choose justice over pride. If the African Union is the conscience of our continent, then Nigeria is currently standing in the dock, accused of a crime against its own brotherhood. We have to look at the gravity of this moment and realize that we are no longer just talking about the fate of one man in a cell in Sokoto. We are talking about whether the word of Africa means anything to the leaders of Africa.
I hope the message they enter, right? I hope it enter well. This message is a kind of message, and when you get it, you will do everything within your power to make sure it goes viral. I'm talking to you, you that is hearing my voice, you that is watching me, you that have never commented on any of my videos, or like, or even share this one. Otherwise, when I get your to trouser.
When the African Union issues a landmark decision like this, it is effectively saying that the Nigerian government has crossed a red line that threatens the stability of the entire region. For those of us watching from the streets of Enugu, Aba, or even the bustling markets of Lagos, the question is simple. If the government can ignore the African Union, the United Nations, and the United States Congress, who exactly are they accountable to? There is a deep irony in seeing President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, a man who built his entire political identity as a pro-democracy activist during the dark days of military rule, now being the one to turn a deaf ear to international human rights protocols. This is the same man who fought for the rule of law when it suited the struggle against Abacha, yet today he sits in the villa while the African Union calls his government out for an illegal rendition. It makes you wonder if power has a way of erasing the memory of the struggle. The analysis coming from every corner of the continent suggests that this stubbornness isn't just a local policy. It feels like a calculated defiance, perhaps fueled by the belief that certain international alliances, like the one with Great Great Britain provide a shield from these continental demands, but a shield can only hold for so long when the pressure is coming from your own neighbors. We cannot ignore the significance of Deji Adeyanju's visit to that prison in Sokoto. Think about the message that sends. Here is a man who has spent his career fighting for a united Nigeria, someone who has often been on the opposite side of the separatist argument, yet he saw the injustice so clearly that he felt compelled to travel hundreds of miles to sit with Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. Their 2-hour private meeting wasn't just a chat, it was a bridge being built over a valley of state-sponsored silence. When Adeyanju came out and said that Kanu does not deserve this imprisonment, he effectively dismantled the government narrative. He showed us that you don't have to want a separate country to want justice for a human being. He pointed out the obvious truth that many are too afraid to say, that the violence in our streets isn't coming from the man in the cell, but from a system that has allowed thugs and chaos to reign while the voices of the people are suppressed. The forced marriage analogy that Adeyanju used is perhaps the most honest description of the Nigerian state we have heard in years. It speaks directly to the Biafran heart. You cannot beat a child and tell them not to cry, and you certainly cannot lock a partner in a room and call it a happy home. By refusing to even entertain the idea of a referendum, the government is essentially saying that the will of the people does not matter as much as the borders drawn by colonial powers. The African Union's investigation into the arrest and extradition of Kanu from Kenya has confirmed what many already suspected, that the Nigerian state acted outside the law. When a state becomes a lawbreaker to catch someone they call a lawbreaker, they lose the moral authority to lead. This planned emergency summit by the AU is a signal that the continent is ready to move beyond just writing letters. They see that the legal process in Nigeria has become a drama of delays and defiance. They see that the appeal court rulings that should have set Kanu free are being ignored or bypassed. This is why the global pressure is mounting. The world sees a pattern of behavior that looks less like a democracy and more like a regime that is afraid of its own citizens. For our audience in the Southeast, this AU decision feels like a ray of hope in a very dark room. It validates the struggle and proves that the eyes of the world are not as closed as the gates of the DSS or the Sokoto prison. As we conclude this analysis, we have to ask ourselves what kind of future we are building. Are we building a Nigeria where justice is a gift given by the president to his friends, or is it a right that belongs to every citizen regardless of their political views? The African Union has given President Tinubu a clear exit ramp from this crisis. By following the AU order and releasing Nnamdi Kanu, the president could signal a new era of reconciliation and respect for international law. He could show that he is big enough to admit when a mistake has been made and brave enough to start a real conversation about the structure of this country. But if the silence continues, the consequences will move beyond the legal and into the social and economic. You cannot expect a region to remain calm and productive when they feel their leader is being held as a political hostage against the orders of the entire continent. You cannot expect international investors to trust a country that treats its own judicial orders and international treaties as optional suggestions. The move by Deji Adeyanju to show empathy and listen is the blueprint that the government should be following. Listening doesn't make you weak, it makes you a leader. The story of Nnamdi Kanu, the African Union's demand, and the growing global consensus for his freedom is a turning point for Nigeria. It is a moment where we decide if we are part of the global community or if we are going to retreat into a shell of isolation and authoritarianism. The Biafran audience, the Nigerian people, and the international community are all waiting for the same thing, for justice to roll down like water. The African Union has spoken with the voice of a continent. The UN has spoken with the voice of the world. Now the only voice left to speak is the one in the presidential villa. Will it be a voice of peace and reason? Or will it be the same silence that has brought us to this edge? The world is watching, and history will remember this decision as the one that either saved the Union or finally broke the bond. When we look at the history of justice in Africa, we often see a tug of war between the power of the state and the rights of the individual. But what is happening right now with the African Union and the Nigerian government feels like something entirely different. It feels like a breaking point. For the AU to step out and issue such a definitive landmark order for the immediate release of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, they are effectively telling the world that Nigeria's legal system has hit a wall it cannot climb over. As your editor and a fellow observer of this unfolding drama, I want us to really sit with the reality of what this means. This isn't just a recommendation from a human rights group or a plea from a local activist. This is the collective voice of the African continent saying that the way Kanu was handled is a stain on the judicial reputation of all African nations. Think about the sheer audacity of what happened in Kenya back in 2021. The African Union's investigation has pulled back the curtain on that operation, calling it exactly what it was, an illegal, extraordinary rendition that bypassed every international protocol. When you snatch a man from a foreign country without following the laws of extradition, you aren't just breaking a rule. You are telling every African citizen that their passport and their location mean nothing if the state decides it wants them. As we come to the end of today's broadcast, remember this: information is power, but only when it reaches the right people at the right time. In a world where narratives are shaped every second, staying informed is no longer a luxury, it is a responsibility. Here on this channel, we go beyond the headlines. We bring you deep, unfiltered updates on Nnamdi Kanu, Simon Ekpa, the Biafra movement, and the unfolding realities across Nigeria, Africa, and the global stage. These are stories that matter, stories that shape identities, influence decisions, and define the future. But we cannot do this alone. If you truly value truth, clarity, and a fearless reporting, then this is your moment to take action. Hit that subscribe button right now and become a part of a growing community that refuses to be left in the dark. And don't stop there. Turn on the bell.
You have heard the message, and it is very, very simple, very, very understanding, and very, very good. Well, I don't know what you have to say, but I know you will surely have something to say. Please drop your thoughts at the comment section of this video. Make sure you like, you share, you comment, and subscribe. Follow us on all our social media handles. Have a nice day. Kemesiano.